Over in Paris, someone decided that Bradley Barcola was worth 170 million euros. CIES Football Observatory values him at 90.2 million, FODMOB at 58 million, and Transfermarkt at 90 million. Now these sites aren't exactly an exact science. Transfermarkt values are often decided by the community, after all, even though they still hold enough weight to be name-dropped by football's top executives. So, you might think that this fourth number that PSG came up with would raise eyebrows. It did not, at least not mine. If Yan Diamande, an unproven 19-year-old Ivorian with one good season in the Bundesliga, half a season in a team that got relegated from La Liga, and admittedly a good World Cup, is deemed worth 140 million euros to the biggest club on the planet, then 170 million for a player only 4 years older than him, winner of back-to-back Champions League titles, who is probably already a top 10 to 15 winger in the world, and also has EU citizenship, sounds about right. And since we're playing the comparison game, it's already been rumored that PSG looked at the respective 135 million euro plus valuations of both Elliot Anderson and Morgan Rogers as justification for this. Perhaps that's where Real Madrid got the idea for the number they apparently bid for Julian Alvarez. By the way, this is the most obvious PR stunt I've ever seen. When was the last time a club formally released a statement about getting rejected? It's all insane. But we live in an insane timeline, so I guess the logic is sound. To be clear, I don't think any of these players are worth anywhere near their valuations. However, it's not surprising that all this madness creates precedent. By the way, I haven't even mentioned Vinicius Jr., who is actually the best left winger in the world, second best at worst. It wasn't long ago that he was being touted for a 150 million euro transfer to Arsenal. That was until he renewed with Real Madrid for a reported 25 million euros a year. A development that you'd imagine the likes of Jude Bellingham will be looking at with keen interest. Now, of course, the reported accuracy of these figures is inconclusive without having access to their actual payslips. In any case, that's irrelevant. Let's not get carried away. Player salaries and that branch is a whole different video. 10 years ago, a 100 million euro transfer rumor would have been the biggest news story in all of world football. Today, it's a Tuesday. There have been 23 100 million euro transfers in the history of top-level football. Real Madrid opened up the floodgates with Gareth Bale's blockbuster move from Spurs in 2013. However, of these 23, 22 have happened from 2016 onwards. 11 of them happened from 2023 onwards. At the time of recording this video, 4 have happened within the last 6 weeks. I mean, basically 5 if you consider Mateus Fernandes, whose Spurs transfer has been widely reported at 99 million. Technically, we can't include that in this list, but I'm gonna mention it anyway, because it's my video. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this transfer window, it makes no sense. Hello everyone, hope you're doing well, welcome back. FIFA logged $13 billion of spending on international transfers in men's professional football across 2025, more than 50% above 2024 and above the previous record set only 2 years earlier by 36%. In real-world terms, actual inflation has been pegged somewhere between 2 and 3% within the Eurozone and the UK, which is why people classify football inflation as something entirely different. Football inflation is a fixed supply of elite footballers meeting a rising tide of money that doesn't really have anywhere else to go. Broadcast deals get bigger, ownership groups get wealthier, prize money grows, all while squad sizes do not. Owners lay off dozens and clubs build bigger and flashier stadiums. So they can keep printing money. As a matter of fact, they will keep printing money, but they cannot in the same way increase the number of 20-something-year-olds on earth who can beat a fullback one-on-one or drop an inch-perfect cross on Joao Neves' head. It's a lot harder to do than it looks. And it looks really hard. There are what, like 10, 15 people on the planet, if we're being generous, that can do either of those things consistently at the highest level of football while also managing to maintain and fulfill the requirements necessary to put in 90 minutes of extreme intensity football twice a week for 10-month stretches at a time. And even they're labeled as donkeys at the slightest error. Oh, and by the way, speaking of inflation, hopeful inflation, you want to know what the greatest thing about subscribing to this channel is? It'll always be free. price isn't gonna go up. So do it. Please? I made a video on the insanity of the transfer market almost 3 years ago. It went into a lot more detail on transfer mechanics, the roles of social media, how the market has grown since the 90s, while addressing the accusations of this whole thing being a bubble. I think it's a good video, you should watch it if you haven't. This one is not an update or rehash of that one, this is more geared towards the current market and transfer mechanics. However, I only bring this one up because for that video, I made this graphic. It's a representation of record-breaking transfer values from different eras for the biggest clubs in the world. It's not an exact science, but it's a representation of how one could argue that growth has simply been linear in all departments. And if we show an update over here just for the handful of clubs that have crossed the 100 million mark, we can see that it kind of tracks. Again, this is not an exact science, this is not how these financial decisions are made. All I'm doing is tracking two publicly known financial markers for these big clubs against each other, purely for the sake of narrative. And the reason I bring that graphic up is because it's now probably a good time to remind everyone that while it may feel like we're being inundated by all these crazy fees and big names and all of that, much of this is just survivorship bias. FIFA officially recorded 24,558 international transfers in men's professional football in 2025. However, the number of football clubs anywhere on the planet that paid any fee at all was 1,214. The overwhelming majority of football transfers were frees or loans. The 9-figure market has only been entered by 12 clubs, all of whom happen to be within the top 16 highest earning clubs on the planet. We have to be honest with what we're looking at over here. Like everything, this is just a case of the rich getting richer. But that's a depressing topic. Let's move on to transfer mechanics. At this point, I'm guessing most of us are fully aware that the correlation between how good a player is and what he costs is very rarely one-to-one. A transfer fee is not a rating, and even though some people argue about it like it is, it probably never was. A transfer fee prices age, ceiling, nationality, homegrown eligibility, existing contract length, replacement difficulty, seller strength, buyer urgency, resale value, and like deep inside the finer print, like inside that, like in the corner, you know, like in that, imagine in that corner over there, it's current ability. Summer 2019, Atletico Madrid pay 126 million euros for Joao Felix. He is 19 and does genuinely look like he could be generational. His ceiling at this point looks non-existent, but here's what's actually happening here. He's Portuguese, so EU citizenship was a tick. He had just extended his contract, meaning he had 3 years remaining. Benfica had just won the league and were thus negotiating as Portuguese champions. It was common knowledge that Atletico Madrid would be losing Antoine Griezmann imminently, with his release clause being set at 120 million euros. Joao Felix's release clause was also 120 million euros. Atletico then offer Benfica 126 million euros. And those 6 million euros are just there so they can spread the payments across installments, allowing Benfica to net exactly 120 million euros and Atletico to manage their cash flow instead of paying it all up front. Atletico were in need of a Griezmann replacement. Felix was young, could be molded into the shape that Diego Simeone wanted, and had innate resale value. So the fact that he had only just debuted for Portugal literally 3 weeks before being signed by Atletico didn't really matter that much. Also, bear in mind, Atletico were in the process of selling Lucas Hernandez for 80 million to Bayern Munich and Rodri for 70 million to Manchester City. All 4 of these deals were confirmed within the same 12-day period. So they clearly had the cash, or were at least about to. All of this culminated in a deal that still makes a lot of people shake their heads almost a decade later, but honestly isn't all that complicated to understand. And by the way, Atletico Madrid recouped about 52 million euros for Joao Felix 5 years later, somehow, which most of us didn't really think was ever going to happen, but was almost entirely down to the fact that Joao Felix was still 24 years old. Nothing is ever like for like. Certain boxes aren't always applicable in all cases, but you can run the same logic on Anthony Gordon this summer to Barcelona. Up to 80 million euros for a winger that few think is worth that much. However, he fulfills a need that Hansi Flick has, plus Newcastle had no need to sell. Neither Newcastle nor Bayer Leverkusen needed to sell Alexander Isak or Florian Wirtz. Liverpool were in need of a striker to fulfill Arne Slot's desires for his team. And even though Isak went on strike to force through this move, and a lot of people interpreted it as Newcastle kind of being forced to sell him and this horrible situation happening, don't get me wrong, it was a horrible situation, but the way I see it, I think Newcastle had all the cards here. You know, they knew that if they waited it out, they were well within their rights to, that if they waited it out until after the transfer window, Isak would likely play, and he would probably want to play quite well so that he could maintain his value and still be desirable and get his dream move afterwards, rather than sit out for the rest of the season. Florian Wirtz was a generational 22-year-old talent on the market, increasing the need for haste. Elliot Anderson and Morgan Rogers are both worth over 135 million euros. Run the list and add homegrown and Premier League proven. RB Leipzig reportedly rejected a package worth about 100 million from Madrid for Diomande. Madrid have Mastantuono, Brahim Diaz, and an ever-injured Rodrigo for their right-hand side options, so there is urgency. You can go through the checklist over here again. Of course, the risk of putting a teenager up above Jude Bellingham, Cristiano Ronaldo, Gareth Bale, and Eden Hazard as the club's most expensive talent is known. The stakes are high, but for whatever reason, this is the price of admission. Moving on, for the upcoming season, throw in the World Cup, the world's biggest audition stage. And Buadi was my pick, I'm sure he was a lot of people's picks, for a player that they hadn't really heard all that much about that blew them away in this World Cup. Currently at Lille, we've been seeing the 100 million euro label attached to his name since he made Casemiro, Lucas Paqueta, and Bruno Guimaraes look ordinary in their opening game. I wanted to close this video off by simply talking about how sad the state of the current market is. We've already alluded to and spoken about the influence of mega clubs pricing out fans, pricing out smaller clubs, all that sort of stuff. But transfers, they've always been about richer clubs getting richer and taking the best players from smaller clubs. This is, you know, it's sad, but it's nothing new. But at least the fanfare around everything and the announcements and all of that, at least they used to be fun. Seeing Manchester United snatch Dimitar Berbatov at the last minute, it didn't work out of course, but that piano announcement when Alexis Sanchez signed for United, no amount of narcotics can emulate that feeling. Seeing Fernando Torres sign for Chelsea, Ozil signing for Arsenal, Bale for Madrid, there are countless more. There was excitement around these signings. There weren't nearly as many charlatan journalists out there, and when any half-decent journalist said something about it, it was probably like 70-80% of the way done, and there was concrete stuff there. And it wasn't just signings that worked this way, it was also extensions. There's a video that's been doing the rounds and trending recently that's reminded everyone what things used to be like and also kind of reaffirmed why it will never go back to that ever again. In December 2010, Bayern Munich midfielder Bastian Schweinsteiger was in the final 18 months of his Bayern contract. Real Madrid and Manchester United were rumored to be after him. Louis van Gaal, his own manager at the time, publicly suggested the club should sell him rather than losing him for nothing. Bear in mind, Schweinsteiger was a fan favorite and had been at the club since 1998 as a youth player. After a win against St. Pauli, Schweinsteiger takes the stadium microphone in front of a jeering crowd that thinks he's about to call it quits and say goodbye.
Ich habe meinen Vertrag für 5 Jahre verlängert für euch.
He extends until 2016 and the place goes wild. This cannot happen today. Somebody would have already leaked this information a whole week earlier, followed by 10 to 20 more people, all claiming that they broke the news first. An AI-generated photo of Schweinsteiger in an AI-prompted version of next season's Bayern shirt would make its way to Reddit. 10 blatantly fake or heavily paraphrased quotes from unknown sources that are speaking anonymously to protect their position at the club would surface on The Athletic, meaning the source is trust me, bro. By the time Schweinsteiger ever reached for the microphone, nobody would be surprised with what he said. However, while we're on this topic, I know I said I was going to close things off, but something we all need to understand is that journalists and sport media outlets, they're not entirely at fault for this new form of journalism. In many cases, They are just the conduit. Leaks have become potent weapons for clubs and players alike. For a club, they can ramp up negative sentiment on troublesome players to force them out. Barcelona and Real Madrid are no strangers to this, but they are undoubtedly not the only ones. For a player, they can send out unofficial feelers to potential clubs through the press as kind of come and get me feelers. The thing about all of this is that in all of these scenarios, the truth doesn't actually matter. Journalists are under no obligation to verify their claims or reveal where they got information from to protect their relationships with their sources, many of whom, let's be honest, just do not exist. And clubs and players that correct journalists run the risk of either verifying a claim, denying a claim, and opening themselves up to a potentially sticky line of questioning or being forced to backtrack if things don't actually work out the way they say they will. Better to stay silent and not show your hand. I mean, during the height of the whole Barcelona, Julian Alvarez, Atletico Madrid situation, I remember reading articles about how Alvarez was thinking about making public statements to try and accelerate a potential move. Bro, what do you mean he's thinking? The man had a thought and you printed a headline? This whole thing is just insane, and I just know we haven't seen anything yet, but watch this space, like I said. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think about the current market, what's gonna happen, all that good stuff. We've got lots of videos coming up, of course. Anyway, that's all for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I'll catch you in the next one.